I told my daughter I had 3 months to live on a Thursday evening in October, not with a tremor in my voice, not staged for effect, just the plain delivery of a man who had already made peace with the sentence before he spoke it out loud. I told her the way you tell someone something that has stopped being new to you. Quietly, on the back porch, with the citronella candle between us, and the last of the light going orange behind the tree line. I said, Marlene, I saw Dr. Osei on Tuesday. It's the pancreas. He gave me 3 months, maybe 4 if I'm stubborn about it. I watched her face the way a man watches weather come in, looking for the first sign of which direction it's going to break. And my daughter, my 41-year-old daughter who I had walked down the aisle twice, who had grown up 2 miles from where we sat, who called herself my favorite even though I never once said I had one, said 4 words before she caught herself. She said, "So, about the cabin." Then she heard it. I watched it land on her own ears half a second after it landed on mine, and I watched her scramble to bury it, to build something around it that sounded like grief instead of arithmetic. She said she meant she wanted to make sure the cabin was taken care of for me, that I wouldn't have to worry about anything, that of course that wasn't what she meant, of course not. She talked for almost 5 minutes, rebuilding the sentence into something safer. But I had already heard the first version. Unrehearsed, unguarded, the version that comes out before a person remembers they are supposed to be someone else in front of you. I did not have 3 months. I did not have 4. I did not have cancer at all, doctor. Osei and I have known each other since our boys played Little League together, and he agreed to help me with something I needed to understand about my own family before I built anything permanent in response to it. What I overheard 2 nights later, standing at my own bedroom window at 11 at night, was worse than about the cabin. Worse in a way I am still turning over in my hands like a stone I can't put down. Hey there, family. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been with me a while, you know how these go. Hit that like button, tell me in the comments what state you're joining me from tonight, and let's get into this one, because this is a hard one for me to tell. My name is Walter Ostrander. I'm 68 years old, and I live outside Bozeman, Montana, on 11 acres, and my father bought in 1958 for less money than a used truck costs today. I spent 31 years teaching high school, shop class, and driver's ed in the same building, which means half the mechanics and most of the safe drivers in 3 counties learned something from me at some point, whether they remember my name or not. My wife Doreen passed 6 years ago. Aneurysm, no warning, gone between one Tuesday and the next. She was the one who kept the family calendar, who remembered every birthday, including the ones by marriage, who was the reason our kids called home as often as they did, because Doreen made calling home feel like something you wanted to do rather than something you were supposed to do. After she died, I noticed the calls thin out on one side of the family and stay steady on the other, and I told myself that was grief, working differently on different people, and for a long time I believed that was the whole explanation. I have 2 children. Marlene is my older, 41, lives 20 minutes away in Belgrade with her husband Todd, who sells commercial insurance, and has never met a room he couldn't work. Marlene manages a dental practice, and she is good at it in the specific way people are good at things that require reading a room before the room knows it's being read. My son Peter is 36, lives in Missoula, 2 hours west, works as a wildland fire dispatcher, which is a job that does not pay what it should for the hours it asks of you. Peter calls every Sunday at 7, has for as long as I can remember, and the one time he missed was the week his second daughter was born, and he called Monday morning to apologize for the day he'd lost, which tells you most of what you need to know about Peter without me saying another word. Peter did not know about the test. I want to say that clearly before I go any further. Nobody knew, except me and Dr. Osei, and I did not decide to build it because I woke up one morning suspicious of my own daughter. It built itself slowly, the way certain things do, out of small pieces that don't mean anything on their own, and only start to mean something once you've collected enough of them to see the shape they're making. It started with the cabin. My father built a hunting cabin on the back 4 acres of this property in 1961, a simple 2-room structure on a ridge that looks out over the Gallatin Range, and it has been in the family since before I was born. Marlene had started asking about it, not directly, a comment about how the cabin was just sitting there empty most of the year, a question about whether I'd ever thought about doing something with it. Renting it out, maybe, since short-term rentals in the area were bringing in real money now. A conversation where she mentioned, almost as an aside, that Todd had a contractor friend who could take a look at it, get a sense of what it might be worth fixed up. I said I'd think about it, and I filed it away. And then 2 months later there was another comment. And then another. Each one small enough to dismiss on its own. Each one part of a pattern I hadn't named yet. Then there was the conversation with Peter, who mentioned, without any weight to it at all, that Marlene had called him to ask how I'd been doing health-wise, whether I'd mentioned anything to him about doctor's visits, whether he thought I was doing okay, being alone out there. Peter hadn't thought anything of it. Peter rarely thinks the worst of anybody, which is either his greatest strength or the thing that's going to get him taken advantage of one day, and I have spent some nights lately worried it might be both. I thought something of it. I thought something of the accumulation, the way you think something of a slow leak in a tire even before you can see exactly where the puncture is. I could not unnotice it once I'd noticed it, and once I'd noticed it, I understood I needed to know for certain before I did anything about it, one way or the other. So I called Dr. Osei. I asked him for a favor that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with a man I've known 30 years being willing to sit across a table from my daughter and confirm a lie if she ever called to check. He agreed, reluctantly, on the condition that I never make this a habit, and that I tell him honestly why I needed it. I told him honestly. He listened without interrupting, the way good doctors do, and at the end he said, "Walter, I hope you're wrong." I told him I hoped so too. Then I called Marlene and asked if she could come by Thursday evening, just the two of us, since Peter had a shift. She said of course, she'd bring dinner, and she showed up 40 minutes early with a casserole and a bottle of wine, which she almost never does unless something has shifted in how she's thinking about a visit. We ate at the kitchen table where Doreen used to keep a bowl of apples year-round out of habit more than necessity, and afterward we moved out to the back porch because the evening was warm for October, and I told her. The business about the doctor, the diagnosis, the timeline. I watched her face do the work of arranging itself into grief, and underneath the arranging, for less than a second, I watched something else move through it first. So, about the cabin. 4 words, and then 5 minutes of her walking them back into something that sounded like love. I have spent my whole life around teenagers who think they're better liars than they are, and I have gotten fairly good at watching a person work backward from a mistake, and Marlene was working backward fast, but not fast enough that I didn't see the seam. We talked another hour. She was tender and attentive in all the ways a daughter should be when her father tells her he's dying. She said she wanted to be there for every appointment. She said we should talk to someone about getting things in order, not to be morbid, just to be practical, just so I wouldn't have to think about any of it while I focused on feeling as good as I could for as long as I could. She said she'd start looking into hospice resources just so we had options. She used the word we 4 times in that hour, and I counted, because counting was easier than feeling what I was feeling while she said it. I thanked her for coming. I thanked her for the casserole. I walked her to her car. I want you to understand that I believed, standing in my driveway watching her taillights go down the gravel road, that the test was over, that I had learned what I set out to learn, and that the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong about that. Thursday night only showed me the surface. What I heard 2 nights later, on Saturday, showed me how deep it actually went. If you're still with me, drop a comment and tell me you're here, because what happened Saturday night is the reason I'm telling this story at all. I don't sleep well since Doreen passed. Never have. And I was up past 11 doing what I usually do at that hour, which is not much of anything, sitting in the dark with the window cracked because I like the sound of the pines when the wind moves through them. My bedroom sits on the corner of the house closest to the gravel turnaround, and sound carries strangely out here at night, the way it does in open country, further and clearer than you'd expect, especially when there's no wind competing with it. I heard a car I recognized come up the drive slow, without headlights on the last stretch, which told me, before I even looked out the window, that whoever it was didn't want to be noticed. It was Marlene's car. She parked at the far edge of the turnaround, near the tree line, not in front of the house the way she normally would, and she sat in the driver's seat with the interior light off, talking on the phone. I did not go outside. I stood at my own window in my own dark bedroom and I listened, because the window carries sound from that part of the drive, straight up to that corner of the house, a fact my father discovered decades ago and used, according to family legend, to catch my uncle sneaking cigarettes as a teenager. I heard her say, "No, he told me Thursday. 3 months, maybe 4. A pause. I know. But listen, before Todd's contractor gets out there, and before Peter gets wind of any of it, I want us positioned on the cabin." Another pause. Longer this time. The whole parcel, the cabin plus that 4 acres on the ridge. In this market, with those views, it's worth 380, maybe 400 if somebody wants it bad enough. Dad hasn't looked at property values out here since before the fires brought half of California moving in. I stood at that window with my hand flat against the cold glass, and I did not move. He's not going to know the difference, she said. He hasn't sold land in his life. If Todd's guy comes in with an offer around 2 to 10, 220, frames it as a fair number from a family friend who wants to keep it in good hands, Dad signs it because he trusts Todd, and we flip the parcel within the year for $150, maybe $170,000 spread. Another pause, and I heard her exhale in a way that sounded almost pleased with herself. The house and the rest of the land, I'm still working that out. Once he's actually gone, that's probate. That's a different conversation. But I want the cabin handled now, while he still trusts me enough to sign whatever I put in front of him. Then her voice dropped, quieter. But the window carried it clean and complete. Peter's not going to be a problem. Peter believes whatever I tell him. I'll handle Peter. My son. The one who calls every Sunday at 7. The one who apologized for missing a call because his daughter chose that exact hour to be born. I'll handle Peter, my daughter said in the dark, in a car with its lights off, 40 feet from the house where she grew up. Something in the center of me went very still, the particular stillness of a question finally getting its answer. Not the answer I had wanted, the one I had been afraid of since the first small comment about the cabin sitting empty. I stood at that window until I heard her car door open properly, heard her walk up to the porch with her ordinary footsteps, and knock the way she always knocks, 3 times. Quick. I let a minute pass before I answered the door, because I needed that minute to arrange my own face the way she'd arranged hers 2 nights before. Couldn't sleep, she said, holding up a grocery bag. Brought you some soup. Figured you might not be eating right with everything on your mind. I thanked her. I let her in. I did not tell her I had heard every word she said in that car, because I did not yet know what I wanted to do with what I now knew. And a man who has spent 31 years managing a room full of 16-year-olds learns not to make a decision in the heat of the moment. He first understands he's been lied to. She left a half hour later. I sat at the kitchen table with the soup going cold in front of me, and I thought about Doreen, and I thought about how she used to say Marlene had her father's stubbornness and her mother's charm, and God help the person on the wrong side of both. I had always taken that as a compliment when Doreen said it. Sitting there Saturday night, I understood for the first time that it could be read as a warning instead, and that Doreen, who saw people more clearly than I ever have, might have meant it that way all along. Sunday morning I did not call Marlene. I called a man named Russ Kavanaugh, an attorney in Bozeman who Peter had used for a lease dispute 2 years back and had described as the kind of guy who doesn't blink. Russ picked up on a Sunday because I told his office it was urgent, and something in my voice must have carried, because he called back within the hour. I told him everything, the fake diagnosis, the reason for it, the conversation in the car, the number Marlene had in mind, the phrase she'd used about her brother. Russ was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he asked, "Mr. Ostrander, do you have clear title to that parcel, the cabin, and the 4 acres, separate from the rest of your property?" I told him it had been surveyed separately back in the 90s for tax reasons, that I had the documents. "Good," he said. "And do you have any record of this conversation you overheard?" I told him no, I hadn't thought to record it. It hadn't occurred to me until it was already happening that I'd need proof of something I hadn't expected to hear. "That's all right," he said. "It would help, but it's not the foundation. The foundation is what's actually yours, on paper, in your name, verifiable, and what you intend to do with it going forward. I want to see you Monday morning. Bring everything, the deed, the survey, your current will if you have one." I asked how soon. He said 8 o'clock. I was there at 1:45. Russ Kavanaugh in person was exactly what his phone voice suggested. Unhurried, precise, the kind of calm that comes from having seen a version of this story enough times that nothing about it surprises him anymore, even when it's still surprising the person sitting across from him. He had a legal pad and he wrote in small, even handwriting while I told him the whole thing, again from the beginning. The cabin comments building over months, Thursday night on the porch, Saturday night at the window. When I finished, he turned to a fresh page and started a list. The deed and survey for the cabin parcel. My current will, which named Marlene and Peter equally, the same as it had for 15 years. A written, dated, signed account of both conversations, as close to word for word as I could manage. The written account of what you overheard. I asked him, how much does that actually hold up without a recording? God, combined with everything else, it holds up fine, he said. You're not filing charges, Mr. Ostrander. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's your call to make later. Right now, we're doing two things. We're documenting what's actually true, and we're making sure the cabin parcel can't move in a direction you didn't choose. That's the whole job today. By Monday afternoon, Russ had a title company confirming the cabin parcel was mine outright. No liens, clean since the original survey. He'd also had it independently appraised by a firm out of Bozeman that specializes in recreational and rural property, and the number came back at $395,000. Almost exactly what Marlene had guessed on the phone in her car, which told me she had done her homework long before Thursday night, likely months before, probably around the same time the comments about the cabin sitting empty had started. I sat with that number for a while, $395,000, and my daughter had been prepared to let a stranger's contractor offer me $210,000 for it, a spread of $185,000 built on the assumption that her father, dying, trusting, and unfamiliar with rural real estate, would sign whatever Todd's friend put in front of him without asking a single question. Russ restructured things over the following 4 days, and I want to tell you plainly what changed and what didn't, because both halves of it matter to me. What didn't change? Peter's half of everything. 15 years his sister's inheritance had matched his, honestly earned, honestly deserved, and nothing I'd learned changed a single true thing about my relationship with my son. What changed was the cabin parcel specifically. Russ placed it in an irrevocable trust with a local trust company as independent trustee, meaning it cannot be sold, leased, or transferred to any family member or any entity connected to a family member, full stop, for as long as the trust exists, which under the terms Russ drew up is for the rest of my natural life plus 21 years after. If it's ever sold, it happens through an independent broker at an independently appraised market price, with the proceeds split evenly between my 2 children regardless of who arranged the sale, because Russ built it specifically so no one could ever again position themselves as the helpful family contact standing between me and a fair number. Peter was named co-trustee alongside the trust company's officer, with full visibility into every document, every appraisal, every future transaction, whether or not he ever chooses to exercise it. I called Peter the day the documents were signed and told him everything. The fake diagnosis, Thursday night. The word he needed to hear was cabin, not finally, and Saturday night at the window. He was quiet on the line for a long stretch, long enough that I asked if he was still there. I'm here, he said. I'm just trying to figure out how long she's been planning this. I don't know, I told him honestly. Longer than I want to think about, probably. He asked what I needed from him. I told him I needed him to keep this to himself for now, and I needed him to know that none of this changed how I felt about him, that if anything it had only made clearer what had been true all along. Dad, he said, you didn't have to put me on as trustee. I trust you to handle it right. I know, I said. That's exactly why it means something that I did it anyway. He was quiet again, and then he said something that stuck with me for days afterward, that he'd always assumed his sister was just busier than him, better at people than him, and it had never once occurred to him that busy and better at people could also mean something colder underneath, and he didn't know what to do with that yet, and neither did I, not fully, not even now. On Saturday, 1 week after the night I stood at my window, I called Marlene and asked her to come by Sunday afternoon. She said, of course, she'd been wanting to check in. How was I feeling? Was there anything she should bring? I told her just herself. She arrived early, the way she had 2 Thursdays before, and I put coffee down in front of her at the same table where we'd eaten the casserole, and I sat across from her the way I used to sit across from a student I was about to fail, which is a particular kind of sitting, one that requires you to already have decided you're not going to flinch. Marlene, I said, before I tell you the rest of this, I want you to hear something true. I love you. Whatever I say in the next few minutes doesn't change that, and I need you to hold on to it while I say it. She looked at me the way a person looks at someone who has just changed the temperature of a room without moving a muscle. I'm not sick, I said. There's no diagnosis, doctor. Osei helped me because I needed to find something out, and I found it out. I watched her face do several things in quick succession, relief trying to surface first and getting stopped by something colder arriving right behind it. I told you I was dying because I needed to see what came out of you before you had time to build something around it. And what came out, Marlene, was, so, about the cabin. 4 words. And then Saturday night I stood at my bedroom window and heard the rest of it, sitting in your car in the dark with your lights off, on the phone, working out a number with Todd's contractor friend behind my back. She did not say anything for a long moment. Her hands were flat on the table, the way a person's hands go still when they've run out of directions to move them. The cabin parcel is in an irrevocable trust now, I told her. It can't be touched, not by you, not by Todd's friend, not by anyone, for the rest of my life and 21 years past it. Peter is co-trustee. He knows everything. Did you tell him what I said about him? She asked, very quietly. I told him everything, I said, including that you said you'd handle him. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she didn't try to tell me I'd misheard, or that it wasn't what it sounded like, and I want to give her that much, because a lesser person in that chair would have spent the next 20 minutes trying to talk me out of my own hearing. How long have you been planning it? I asked her. Another long silence, the kind with real weight sitting inside it. About 8 months, she said finally, since Todd's business slowed down and we started falling behind on the house in Belgrade. You could have told me that 8 months ago, I said. You could have called me the way Peter calls me, and said, Dad, we're struggling, we need help. And I promise you, Marlene, I would have listened. I don't know what I would have done, I want to be honest with you about that, but I would have listened, and it would not have looked anything like what you built instead. She put her head down for a moment, her hand over her eyes, and when she looked up there were real tears in them. And I've thought a great deal since about how much of that was grief for what she'd done, and how much was simply the exhaustion of having carried a lie that long without anyone to share the weight of it with. Dad, she said, I'm sorry. I believe that you're sorry it came apart, I told her. I'm still working out whether you're sorry for the thing itself. Those aren't always the same, sorry, and I think you know that as well as I do. She nodded, slow, and didn't argue the point, which told me something too. The will, she said. What happens now? Peter's half stays exactly as it was, I said. Yours stays as well, everything except the cabin parcel, which is protected the way I've described. This isn't punishment, Marlene. I need you to hear that clearly. This is accuracy. It reflects what's actually true between us right now. If what's true between us changes over the coming years, genuinely changes, I'll revisit every part of it, because I'm not interested in holding this over you forever. I'm interested in what's real, starting today. She asked where she should start. With Todd, I said. Tell him the truth about what happened here today, all of it, not the version that makes either of you look better. And then you call your brother yourself, not me calling to tell him what you said, you calling him. She said Peter would be furious. Yes, I told her. And then he'll listen because your brother has always been better at both those things than either of us gave him credit for, and I think it's past time we both started giving him that credit. She left a little after 4. I stood at the same window I'd stood at the Saturday before, only this time in daylight, and I watched her taillights go down the long gravel drive past the tree line, past the spot where she'd parked in the dark a week earlier, and I stood there a good while after the sound of her engine had faded into the pines. Then I walked the 4 acres out to the cabin, something I hadn't done in longer than I'd like to admit, and I stood on the little porch my father built with his own hands in 1961 and looked out at the Gallatin Range, going purple in the last light, and I thought about Doreen, who used to say that land like this doesn't belong to anybody, it just tolerates you for a while and outlasts whatever you tried to do with it. I think she would have handled all of this differently than I did. Less architecture, less waiting for the right Thursday, more of just sitting Marlene down the first time she mentioned that cabin sitting empty and asking her straight out what she really meant by it. She was better at directness than I've ever been, but she wasn't here to ask. And I did what I know how to do, which is build something sturdy enough to hold weight, and make sure it holds, and write it all down so nobody can argue with it later. I called Peter that evening and told him how it had gone, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he asked how she'd sounded at the end. Like someone setting something down that had gotten too heavy to keep carrying, I told him, and not sure yet what her hands are supposed to do without it. He made a small sound, half a laugh, half something else. That does sound like her, he said. We talked another half hour about nothing important, about his girls, about a fire season that was shaping up slow for once, about the cabin and whether he wanted to drive out and see it before the snow came. When we hung up, I sat on the back porch a while in the cold, in the chair Doreen used to sit in on summer evenings, and I looked out at the dark tree line where a car had once idled with its lights off, and I felt, for the first time in 8 months of small unnamed suspicions, something settle in my chest that I can only describe as a kind of tired, complicated peace. The cabin was still standing. The paper said what was true, and somewhere in Belgrade, my daughter was sitting down with her husband to have a conversation neither of them had wanted to have. And what came out of that conversation was hers to build, not mine. I don't know yet what Marlene and I are going to be to each other 5 years from now. I know what's documented. I know what's protected. I know that Peter drove out the following weekend and stood with me on that cabin porch and didn't say much of anything, just looked out at the mountains for a long while the way his grandfather used to. And I know that the 4 words I heard on that back porch in October taught me something I hadn't expected to learn at 68 years old, which is that the people who love you and the people who are waiting on you are not always as easy to tell apart as you'd like to believe, right up until the moment one of them forgets, just for a second, which one they're supposed to be pretending to be. If this one stayed with you, tell me in the comments which moment got you, the porch, the window, or the kitchen table, because I read every single one of them. Hit that like button, subscribe if this is your first time sitting with me, and I'll see you next time, family. Because if there's one thing 31 years in a classroom and 68 years on this earth taught me, it's that the truth doesn't need you to catch it lying. It just needs you to give it enough room, and it'll walk itself right out into the open.